Hello, friends, and welcome once again to a little ditty we like to call Syracuse Sports. My name is Brent Axe. It is so great to have you here. It's great to have our friends at Kraus Health on board, the exclusive healthcare provider for Syracuse athletics. And it's just a great time to be a Syracuse football fan, isn't it? We are deep in the heart of basketball season, and that basketball team is playing pretty darn well, as we discussed on our postgame show after Syracuse beat Oregon and, of all places, South Dakota. And there'll be plenty of time to discuss Syracuse basketball for sure. But usually by now, football has faded off, even with signing day just a couple days away. Syracuse fans always went into signing day with a little trepidation in recent years. What kind of class do they have here? What exactly is going on? These are extraordinary times. I have never seen anything like this when it comes to Syracuse football and what Fran Brown has brought to the table in just a few short weeks since we knew he came on the table as a candidate, was hired as the new Syracuse football head coach with recruiting as the background. And what we have seen is something I've never seen in my time covering Syracuse football and certainly living in central New York my whole life. There's been a lot of talent that has come through here. Let's not get crazy here. The Donovan McNabbs of the world, the Marvin Harrisons of the world, the Dwight Freeneys of the world back to the 1980s, Tim Green. You can go through all the names. Syracuse football is no shortage of high-level talent. But let's be honest here. In the last 20 to 25 years, if he had one four-star in a class, Syracuse fans were dancing a jig. Now you're getting multiple four stars. And the one that leads the way is Kyle McCord, the Ohio State transfer in this new era of college football where transfers can come in. And to go from Ohio State to Syracuse comes with a lot of questions. Why would you go from Ohio State to Syracuse is probably the first question in mind. It's certainly the question that I had. But we're in a new era in college football, right? Where being at a high-level program might not be enough if you're in the right place with the right coach. McCord is somebody that sees himself potentially making a path to the National Football League. You can go somewhere else and start over. There's probably no better example of that recently from Syracuse than Tommy DeVito, who went the other way. Things didn't quite work out here. Garrett Shrader stepped in for him. He gets another chance at Illinois. And now we're all doing this with DeVito, with the New York Giants, though they did get run over it, but by the New Orleans Saints this weekend. So maybe the Tommy DeVito bubble is going to burst a little bit here. But McCord leads the way. And you guys had a lot of questions about Kyle McCord. Our Syracuse Sports Insiders have been fired up about this story. And by the way, our Syracuse Sports Insiders were the first to learn on Saturday night, as I broke the story, that Kyle McCord would be committing to Syracuse. You got the news first. A late text. Sorry about that. The news happens when the news happens sometimes, guys. But you were very appreciative to know first that Kyle McCord would be committing to Syracuse on Sunday. We saw the news officially, and now we need to know about Kyle McCord. And our Syracuse Sports Insiders have had plenty of questions. We would love for you to become a Syracuse Sports Insider today. Just text the word orange to 315-847-3895. You get breaking news like that first. You get my opinions first. You can ask me anything you want. I've had a great running back and forth with a number of Syracuse Sports Insiders. We really have enjoyed this. I've enjoyed this. I love hearing your questions and your opinions and getting to know some of you. So keep the questions coming, keep the opinions coming. You get priority not only on this podcast, but on our Syracuse postgame shows as well. There's a lot of great perks to being a Syracuse Sports Insider, friends. It's just 2 weeks free and then $3.99 a month after that. Try it for 2 weeks, absolutely free. You don't like it? Hey, no harm, no foul. But we think you will. So try it free for 2 weeks, then just $3.99 a month after that. By the way, you can cancel at any time. So you had some great questions about Kyle McCord. As Mike MC says, someone pinch me. It's a great time to be a Syracuse Orangeman. McCord comes in as one of the highest rated recruits, let alone quarterbacks, that Syracuse has seen since they really started tracking this stuff, since the 247s and the Rivals of the world and all these recruiting services came on the scene. He's among the top 10 quarterbacks available in the portal, according to both 247 Sports and On3 Sports. A former 5-star high school quarterback out of St. Joseph's Prep in Philadelphia, number 6 quarterback recruit in the country, number 2 player in Pennsylvania in the class of 2021. So as Mike says, pinch me. Why would he be coming to Syracuse, right? You guys have some other questions here. Roger, ask your guest, and we're going to have Nathan Baird on today, guys, from cleveland.com, who covers Ohio State. He's got the Buckeye Talk podcast. Much like we do with you, the Syracuse Sports Insiders, they've got a text group in Cleveland as well. They really kind of showed us the way on how to do this, as our friends with the Buffalo Bills, Matt Perino and Ryan Talbot, have done as well. And Roger wants to know, ask what McCord is like when he's forced to leave the pocket. Is he a disaster? David wants to know the same thing. Should we be concerned about his passing under pressure? Jeff from Twitter saying, I'd love to get some insight into his confidence level. OSU fans have been brutal to the kid despite a darn good year in which he went 11-1. And Mike V saying, I think there's been a lot of crap thrown at this kid and criticism. 7 points away from the playoff. Let's be welcoming and appreciate him. And yeah, those Ohio State fans, frankly, have been brutal and are spoiled. Ohio State fans, it's like they're complaining about what year champagne they're drinking. Oh, this is a 85. I wish the 83 Cristal. Like, give me a break, right? Syracuse fans just had to watch a patchwork MacGyver-like way to get over the finish line just to finish a season with Garrett Shrader hurt. And that's what I wanted to say here before we get to our guest, Nathan Baird, and talk about Kyle McCord and the focus there. So it was announced on Monday, shortly before we started recording this podcast, by the way, and I am like paranoid to record podcasts these days because the recruits and the news comes so fast and furious these days, but that's why it pays to be a Syracuse Sports Insider, because you guys will get that stuff. We'll do some emergency pods. Like, I am on standby this week to do a number of things based on as we approach signing day and the just frantic pace, no pun intended, that Fran Brown has been on and bringing in new players to Syracuse. But Garrett Shrader put out this statement on Monday, and it's on your screen if you're watching on YouTube. As we learned, he has been playing with a tear in his shoulder since October. Played basically half the season hurt, comes back for the Wake Forest game. He did a flip in that game, let's not forget, even with the injury, but saying it was important for me to get our team to a bowl game. You can see the statement there on your screen. You can check it out on social media as well. And I was thinking about this. I actually wrote a column about this a couple weeks ago, guys, after the Wake Forest game. This is something that will not be forgotten anytime soon for Syracuse football fans. The way that Garrett Shrader gutted it out. We knew he was playing hurt. This was just, putting the cherry on top of the sundae and putting something official on something everybody knew, that Shrader was playing hurt. Now we just have some specifics that he won't play in the bowl game. He had to get surgery, what exactly the injury was, but we all knew that guy was just a walking Frankenstein out there, right? But I'm thinking about guys that had, walk-off performances in Syracuse football history, whether they're high-level guys like Jim Brown, who scored 43 points against Colgate in 1956. Michael Owens, the 2-point conversion against West Virginia in 1987. That caps an undefeated season. Chris Gedney, just 3 yards short of the end zone in 1992 against Miami. How about Donovan McNabb and his senior day symphony against Miami in 1998? Walter Reyes, 5 touchdowns, Notre Dame 2003. The Diamond Ferry game in 2004 against Boston College. Trill Williams walk-off at the Dome against Wake Forest just a couple of years ago. With the dust settling on his career, Shrader is 4th in rushing touchdowns, 5th in total yards and passing yards and completions. Top 5 quarterback in rushing touchdowns, 31, total yards, 7,255, passing yards at just under 6,000, and 457 completions. His name was already coming into the season on over 20 top 10 lists in Syracuse's record book entering the season. But I don't think anybody's going to remember Garrett Shrader for numbers. Eric Dungy was the combination of numbers and grit. A guy that would run into tackles, leap over defenders, that famous shot of Dungy leaping over a Miami tackler, right? Shrader's legacy is going to be that he gutted this team through and got them over the finish line to a bowl game. Yep, the Dino Baber story and everything that has happened since is prominent and may take over. But when someone says the name Garrett Shrader 5, 10, 15 years ago, you're going to remember that guy gutted through, played hurt, and got Syracuse over the bowl game finish line. Barely, right? Which is why you had to bring in a Kyle McCord, because when your starter gets hurt and Syracuse has not gone wire to wire with a starting quarterback having to leave a game since Ryan Nassib in 2012. Eric Dungey came close in 2018. He started every game, but remember, Tommy DeVito had to come in a couple of times in relief, including against North Carolina that year, to supplant Eric Dungey. You need quarterbacks at Syracuse. And Kyle McCord comes in to be the projected starter to get some big-time NIL money. You're going to hear that detail coming up in our conversation with Nathan. And these extraordinary times that we are in, that Syracuse can approach a 5-star, high-level, one of the most sought-after quarterbacks in the country a few years ago and say yes. And the continuing success that Fran Brown has had both on the recruiting trail and in the transfer portal, with more to come. We are not done there, folks. There is more to come on that. But what do you say we take a pause and focus on Kyle McCord and the story of how he went from Ohio State to Syracuse with Nathan Baird from cleveland.com. That's coming up next, guys. So, Nathan, when I called you the first time and said, I think this is a thing, I think this is a possibility that Kyle McCord could at the very least be looking at Syracuse. I had heard that Fran Brown, the new Syracuse head football coach, had gone out to visit Kyle. Like, what were you thinking? What? Syracuse? Come on. What's the deal with that?
Well, it made a little bit of sense just from, I suppose, the Fran Brown connection, the New Jersey connection. That's obviously where Kyle is from. And in general, I guess something that went farther east did make some sense to me, just because, again, that's where his roots are. But Syracuse, obviously, being a place that is in a little bit of a turnover, I guess you would say, you know, I wouldn't know if you'd say a full rebuild. You know, you're coming off a 6-win season. You're going to a bowl game. I don't know if that qualifies as a rebuild, but obviously, Kyle McCord is leaving a place that was. I mean, you can go back, just 5 weeks, 6 weeks. They were the number 1 team in the college football playoff rankings. They're 11-0, ranked number 2 in the country going into the regular season finale. And he's the presumptive starter going into next year for that same program. And this obviously is a downgrade. I don't know how else you could say it in terms of the stature of the program. However, if your motivation is to go someplace where you are assured of being the guy for this one season of eligibility that you have left, then I think a program like this is maybe the only tier in which he could really shop this situation.
So that's what I'm fascinated by here, Nathan. Just go back 5-6 weeks, as you mentioned, and Ohio State's on top of the world. It all seems to be in line. McCord's kind of the next quarterback. There's been a lot of great ones there, as you have seen, as well as anybody, Dwayne Haskins and C.J. Stroud and Justin Fields. So I guess what happened? How did this get to the point where Kyle McCord wanted to leave Ohio State and is now at Syracuse in those last 5-6 weeks?
Well, it seems very sudden in the way it unfolded at the end. From things I was told in immediate aftermath, and I think other people have reported similar things here over the past couple of weeks, I think it was more of a slow burn than that. The fact that it took as long as it did for Ryan Day to commit to Kyle McCord as the starting quarterback, the fact that when he talked about Kyle over the course of the season, maybe his praise wasn't as effusive as it had been for his predecessors, C.J. Stroud, Justin Fields, the fact that maybe that just the sort of the body language that you saw from Ryan Day at times this year was kind of, I think there was a sense around McCord's camp, however you want to say it, that maybe the support wasn't there as much. And then in the immediate aftermath of the game, the losing the game at Michigan, a lot of the criticism seemed to fall on McCord's shoulders, and it wasn't like Day went out of his way to be a barrier to that, I suppose. And I don't think he was throwing him under the bus by any means. I think, when asked about evaluations of the quarterback play in that game, he did, bring up the turnovers that, Ohio State had 2, Michigan had none, and that being both of those were interceptions that McCord threw, and that being a factor in how a one possession game turned out. So I think there were just a lot of those things kind of swirling. And then as we were told now, but multiple sources, there was a meeting that week after the Michigan game, heading into the opening of the portal on the 4th, and McCord essentially asked for an assurance that he was going to be the starter on opening day next year. He was going to be QB1 for 2024, and Ryan Day balked at that and was not prepared to commit to him. And to me, that didn't really necessarily, I don't understand why that was maybe, I do understand from their perspective because he's only got 1 year left. He has to go somewhere where he's sure he's going to play. But realistically, you had a guy in Devin Brown, a second-year quarterback this year, who pushed McCord all the way into the start of the season as to who was going to start this year. You have another fairly highly ranked, like top 150 guy who was a true freshman this year in Lincoln Keenholz, who you needed to do a new evaluation of. You have a 5-star quarterback coming in this freshman class named Aaron Noland, who needs his own evaluation. And all those things sort of had to play out this spring before you would necessarily commit to any person. And I know that coming out of 2021, Ohio State was, Ryan Day, I should say, more specifically, was more quick to commit to C.J. Stroud as obviously the QB1 going into next year with McCord and other people on the roster. But C.J. Stroud was a Heisman finalist, and Kyle McCord was third team All Big Ten, and that's a pretty huge differential. So if you had asked me going into that weekend before the portal opened, the odds that Kyle McCord would be in it first thing Monday morning, I would have been surprised. I mean, I would not have put high odds on that. But then we had a Selection Sunday press conference with Ryan Day, and he was very non-committal towards Kyle McCord, not only in the scenario that I'm talking about, like who's going to start for 2024. He was like, well, we'll see what happens in bowl practice, like who's going to start the Cotton Bowl. And that was a big signal to us that something was going on, that there had been either there had been a fracture or that he was just so ambivalent about the quarterback play that he thought it was worth just opening things up, like having a completely open mind. And as it turns out, because that meeting had already happened, because some things had already been communicated as to what McCord was thinking, I think that's why he was trying to tell us without telling us. He wasn't going to make that announcement for McCord. We were told that Kyle had not told them for sure that he was going in the portal before that press conference happened. I think there were a lot of things that were just kind of up in the air, and that also explained why he was so non-committal at that moment. But that's what we understand to be the issue, that, because Kyle had used his red shirt, burned his red shirt as a true freshman, had played enough games in the subsequent years that he never had a redshirt season. He was down to 1 year of eligibility, and to go into that year with the uncertainty of, are you bringing in a transfer quarterback, which we actually have no indication that they've strongly pursued a transfer quarterback at this point. To think that somebody else on the roster could beat him out, to have no assurances that you're going to be the guy. I do understand from their perspective. I understand from both perspectives. I understand why Kyle McCord and the people around him would want that sort of security and need it. I understand from Ryan Day's perspective why on December, whatever day they had that meeting, November, December, he can't give it. Like it would be, I think, borderline irresponsible for him as a coach to give that assurance.
This just all sounds like an amazing case study about college football in 2023, right? As a player, you can look around, you would think it can't get better than Ohio State, but if you just want to play, showcase yourself, maybe pick up some more NIL money, which the fact that Syracuse might be able to pay more NIL money than Ohio State is a whole conversation in and of itself. But he just kind of looked at his options and felt going elsewhere was best. And here we are. So everything you just said there is so fascinating, Nathan, but I want to circle back on something. And you know as well as anybody how big that Michigan game is. Is Kyle being scapegoated in a way for the Michigan loss? And look, social media is what it is. But man, some of the fan reaction that I've seen, and not just on social media, by the way, people that have been texting me, because we do the text line just like you guys did, and it did an amazing job showing the way for us. And, I'm hearing from Syracuse fans like, oh, man, I talked to my Ohio State buddies, and this is what they say about McCord. It feels to me that he's been kind of scapegoated a little bit. Would you agree with that?
Well, I don't think he was scapegoated by the staff. I think he has been maybe scapegoated by a certain segment of the fan base. Sure. I mean, as you know, anytime a significant loss like that happens, or things aren't going the way that you want them to, people look for an answer beyond the team that I rooted for just wasn't good enough that day. They look for the person to blame. And the Michigan game was a kind of a microcosm of Kyle's season. Slow starts were something that were recurring throughout the year. Like, you can go back and look at a number of games where his first quarters and first halves really kind of lagged, and then he would turn things on in the second half. That definitely happened against Michigan. He has the interception early on, and he only threw 6 interceptions this year. The last interception that he threw was not his fault, I would argue. Like, he steps up in the pocket, he gets hit as he threw. 2 offensive linemen are laying on the ground on the most important snap of the season, and he's got Marvin Harrison Jr. open and gets hit as he throws, and the pass is short and it gets picked off. I do not put that on him. The first one, there's some debate out. He made a quick throw, but the cornerback had the inside look on that slant from the beginning, and he just stepped in front of it and picked it off, and that sets up the first Michigan touchdown, and they lose by 6. And there had been because he only had 6 interceptions all year, it doesn't look like he had a turnover problem. And I guess he didn't have a turnover problem. What there was, though, was a lot of like loose moments. Even in his biggest moment of the year, leading that touchdown drive to beat Notre Dame, he threw a pass that we still don't really know to this day how it didn't get picked off. It basically hit a DB in the hands, and that could have ended that right there. And now the season is completely altered off the beginning. So... And there were some other moments where he would just get a little bit loose with it in the pocket. There was an interception in the red zone at Wisconsin. And I can only point to you maybe just these handful of moments, but the biggest thing that Kyle had going against him this year was just the what do you want to say? Like the path that he has had to follow. Like you got Dwayne Haskins in 2018, has this record-setting year, like the greatest passing season in Ohio State history, certainly most prolific passing season in Ohio State history. That's followed up by Justin Fields, who immediately goes to New York as a Heisman finalist and has 2 great seasons, followed up by C.J. Stroud. People know what C.J. Stroud's doing in the NFL right now, and all the seeds of that were planted at Ohio State just in terms of his ability to process and read and make accurate throws. And Kyle came in this year, and instead of being like one of the arguably 3 or 4 best quarterbacks in the country, was like one of the best 15 quarterbacks in the country. And that was in some ways the biggest drawback to him, which isn't his fault. There's been no indication that Kyle wasn't a hardworking guy, very competitive guy. He wanted to win, that I think his teammates respected certainly the work that he was putting in to try to become the best quarterback possible. The ceiling for it was lower than what the people immediately in front of him were. And I think that's where too much of the criticism went on him. And we talked before the season, as we were analyzing this team, to try to give people an indication hey, this probably isn't going to look like it did with C.J. Stroud. He's a different kind of quarterback. We don't know that he's going to be the same level of skill, and this team is going to have to win in other ways. And by and large, a lot of those other ways did show up. The running game eventually clicked in. The defense was tremendous all season. But there was always kind of this underlying feeling, I think, that the quarterback play, when it needed to be excellent, was it going to be excellent enough? And the Michigan game is, again, it's kind of a microcosm of that, because he comes back, has a good second half, leads them back to where they're driving, ball in their hands, chance to take the lead at the end of the game, but doesn't quite get there. It was always good or really good, but never great. And Ohio State has just been used to great and needed great in a game like that, and just it wasn't there.
All right, Nathan, you actually did this for me for our Syracuse Sports Insiders on the text line, and they really appreciated it. So let's bring it to the podcast here. Put your Mel Kiper Jr. hat on. Give me the breakdown of Kyle McCord, the quarterback. Now, what we understand is that Jeff Nixon is going to come here from the New York Giants. He is going to run a pro-style offense. I mean, I think that's why they targeted McCord. I think that's a big reason why they got McCord. So knowing that Syracuse has brought in a couple of receivers from Georgia in the portal, they got a commitment from a 4-star wide receiver. That's a position they've really built up in the portal and in recruiting. There's the potential that Arondé Gatson could be back, who's an NFL level receiver, who's recovering from a foot injury, but it's looking pretty good that he may be back next year. Dan Villari emerged this year here in Syracuse as a real pass catching tight end threat. Also played a little quarterback down the stretch. Speaking of which, with Garrett Shrader injured, this is what we know. They've got LaQuinn Allen, who's a terrific running back. We're still wondering if they're going to pluck some more offensive linemen out of the portal. So all that is a setup. Kyle McCord comes to Syracuse. Give me the Mel Kiper Jr. breakdown of the good and bad and what kind of quarterback you think he could be here.
So I think it's encouraging to hear that sort of offense is the one that's being built around him, because I think that probably does fit his skill set the best. And Ryan Day, from the beginning, sort of the marching orders that Kyle McCord had was to, and this sounds like damning with faint praise, to say that you need to manage the game, but not to be a game manager. I don't think they're asking that. They still want a quarterback who can be a playmaker, but that you have Marvin Harrison Jr., you have Emeka Egbuka, who's coming off a 1,000-yard season people thought might be a first-round receiver. You've got Trevion Henderson in the backfield, and people can see the second half of the year that he had when he came back from injury and what he's capable of. You mentioned that, like, a tight end, he utilized the tight end here, Cade Stover, who was a Mackey finalist and the Big Ten tight end of the year. Like, all those weapons, it was about, you have all these weapons, just go out and don't make mistakes and just get the ball in the hands of all these guys. So I think that's maybe the first thing to know about him, is that by and large, this was not someone who was working outside the pocket, working off platform, doing a lot of stuff with his legs. And some of that was by design. Some of that is Ryan Day has been a little bit hesitant to let guys go out and run. CJ Stroud didn't do it for his entire 2 years until the Georgia game last year. Now he's done even a little bit more of it in the NFL. You see maybe a more complete version of him now, because Day has been so reluctant to let his starters go out there and be exposed to injury and contact when you have all these other weapons at your disposal. So I think that's the kind of offense that can maybe fit him the best. Somewhere where he's going to be protected well, work in the pocket, and just distribute. And when it was at its best this year, it looked good. I mean, you had, Marvin Harrison Jr. can make a lot of quarterbacks look good. But I would argue that there were times where McCord made like really impressive throws where he could put like a zip on the ball. He could hit guys in the back pocket or the outside shoulder as needed. Like, all the throws were there. What I think one of the things that you heard, and it all depends on your ear, right? Like, if you're on McCord's side, you hear this one way. If you're just a fan, you might hear it another way, or you're a media member. But, Day would often, when asked, like, Kyle had a really good game today. Somebody would ask him in a post-game press conference, and he'd be like, yeah, like when he gets his footwork right, when he gets set and everything is like in rhythm, he's fantastic. And it always kind of came back to that whenever he would talk about how well Kyle had played. And I think sort of the undercurrent of that was that's not happening consistently enough. And that's what I have always looked at it and was projecting ahead to 2024, thinking, okay, well, now he's set this baseline of production, and now he gets to build on that and figure those things out. You've got a whole, 9 months now to take into the start of next season where you get to get those things in sync and like work on your footwork, work on your fundamentals. Those were things that lacked a little bit, I would say. This just the consistency of it, and again, because of the standard that's here, those things I think were more noticeable. You can go look at his numbers and how they stack up against some of the quarterbacks who are like out there in the portal. Some of them are even going to like bigger programs. The numbers stack up, but I think in terms of just the full execution of it and trying to maybe project him into an offense that didn't have all these tools, you would say that those fundamentals do have to be refined a little bit going into this season. So I think his quarterback tutelage is going to be important in this next year. He has some guys he works with on his own, as everybody does, but and he had a good. I think Ryan Day's track record sort of speaks for itself in that regard. So he's coming from having a good background set in that way. I just think that it's about the next step that he takes, because I think what you saw this year was someone who was able to like utilize a weapon like Marvin Harrison Jr., was able to, especially when Trevion Henderson came back, was really good at checking down to him and letting him get out in space and work. What I think you're still waiting to see from Kyle McCord is that next step. That next step where he becomes more of a playmaker, where he can be the guy who really puts a team on his shoulders at times. And I think that was to go back to like sort of the fan reaction, coming out of that Notre Dame game, he leads that touchdown drive. They get the ball back with a little over a minute left. They've got to go 65 yards. They have to get a touchdown.
It was
and they
impressive.
drive down and get it. Yeah. And people can look like there was whatever that second and 19, third and 19 throw, whatever it was that he makes to, I can't remember the distance now off the top of my head, but just a tough in traffic throw to Emeka Buka that takes him down to the goal line and sets up that touchdown. Like he made those plays. Like you can't take that away from him. Like he legitimately went out there and led that. But the next step didn't really happen. The thing where people thought like, okay, that'll be like a confidence builder. That can be a real, this is definitely his job, his team now. He can get more comfortable and have that like confident next step. And whether it was the ankle injury that he dealt with all season, because he did get hurt in that game. He hurt his ankle in that game, and it bothered him the rest of the year. Or whether that just wasn't where he could take it at this stage of his career, that next step never really showed up. At least not, again, it showed up in flashes, but in terms of like consistency, it never really showed up. And I think that's still the thing that you're waiting for but there's no reason to think it can't happen. I mean, again, he's got 9 months now to go in with this new system and just refine his game and show that last year was just a baseline, and that even without a Marvin Harrison Jr. in his arsenal, no disrespect to the guys that Syracuse has, but even without like that kind of generational talent in your receiving core, he can still be a guy who goes out and leads a really productive offense.
That's what's interesting, Nathan, because what we've seen at Syracuse, and they're making a coaching change here, so we'll see what the pro style approach brings and everything. But from Garrett Shrader, who we found out as we record this on Monday, we found out today he played basically the whole season with a tear in his shoulder, had to get surgery, but still came back in the last game of the year and just willed Syracuse over the bowl game eligibility finish line to get him there. So just to show you the injuries he was playing with, but he's a mobile quarterback. The best success that Dino Babers had was with Eric Dungy, who's a guy that can move. So they're going in a different direction in that sense. So that's interesting to hear that about McCord and the style in which he plays. And he is, from what we have seen, the most acclaimed quarterback that Syracuse has brought in basically since like the 247s of the world and the rivals of the world really started tracking this stuff, just to give you a sense of what kind of quarterbacks. They've had some successful ones, don't get me wrong, but Syracuse isn't pulling in 5-star quarterbacks a lot. It just has not happened in the last 20 to 25 years. So I want to know about Kyle in terms of, obviously he had a connection with Fran Brown. The New Jersey connection certainly worked. Kyle knew a couple of players here at Syracuse, Dennis Jacquez Jr., Elijah Clark, our Jersey guys. I think that helped. He was certainly looking at, it appears, for some a boost in NIL money. So tell me about some of those intangibles, Nathan, particularly that. Was he a guy that was getting significant NIL money at Ohio State? Was he in commercials? Was he like the face of the program? Because from what I understand, Syracuse stepped up there and he could get upwards, I'm hearing, of about $500,000-$600,000 in NIL deals if this all rounds out. What was he getting out Ohio State's way?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have that exact dollar figure. I know that they were, I think disappointed in that, or that it came up in that meeting. What else can happen in terms of NIL guarantees? And Ohio State is not really a place that works in terms of NIL guarantees. I think guys who have come here and succeeded usually get taken care of from an NIL standpoint. Like, they have a strong apparatus for that once the guy is here. What they're not usually in the business of doing is offering like upfront money. Now, Kyle was already here, obviously, so that's a bit of a different scenario. But I also think that it's one of those things where there's the opportunities are CJ Stroud, I mean, as an example, like had national campaigns, was getting, from what we've heard, like a decent endorsement income when he was here. So I think that opportunity is there for anybody who comes to Ohio State and succeeds. But again, if Kyle McCord wasn't getting the same NIL returns as CJ Stroud was, he also wasn't as good of a quarterback as CJ Stroud was. And I want to make sure that I some of what there is a gap here. in terms of just, perception and expectations and standards. And at Ohio State, like Ohio State's coming off an 11-1 season where they're going to a New Year's 6, and it's a disappointment. And there's only
nice.
there's only a few. Well, it's not. It's really frustrating at times, and it's hard because it makes you wonder sometimes, like, well, when do you actually enjoy it? Like, is going undefeated and winning a national championship the only thing you can enjoy? And that's not to say that you shouldn't be disappointed if you think a team fell short of its potential, or that or in the fact that they've lost now 3 in a row to Michigan is the thing that has really bothered people, because they dominated that series for so long, and now even when they had C.J. Stroud, they couldn't beat Michigan here these past 2 years. Although obviously people know we're not going to even go into the questions that surround that for the past 2 years. My point being that I have to give the Kyle McCord breakdown from that perspective, because that's what we live in here, is the 11-1 isn't good enough perspective. Whereas I think there's every reason to believe he will be able to go to any place outside of that tiny place where the standards are insanely high and have great success. Like, I don't see any reason to think that he won't go to a place like Syracuse and help that team be better than it would have been otherwise. Like, you're getting a very strong quarterback talent relative to the rest of college football. From an intangible standpoint, that is something that we're also still kind of trying to parse out in the aftermath of this, because we heard great things along the way. And I know that he was close friends with guys on the team. We just had interviews with those guys last week, and a lot of players spoke up and said the way that he got treated, especially by fans, to get back to what you were saying before, was unfair. That there was too much criticism that's laid at his feet. Again, some of that is just being the quarterback. That goes with, because you're going to get sometimes more credit than you deserve to. But they really saw the emotional toll that was taking, and they thought that was unfair. But there was, along the way, like, we heard stories of guys telling about, I remember Donovan Jackson, the starting left guard, was talking about how Kyle was, like, always one of the last guys to leave. Like, he would be going home, and he would see Kyle, like, over in the hot tub or whatever, like, with his iPad, like, going over film. I was told that in that week leading up to the Michigan game, he was putting in really, really long days, both to get treatment on that ankle and to do a lot more film study. And there's never been anyone who I've heard that says that this isn't a guy who isn't a team guy, who isn't a strong competitor, who isn't someone who takes this seriously and prepares and does what he has to do to try to become a better quarterback. He was doing stuff in the spring, like going to Texas and working with, I think it was Patrick Mahomes' quarterback coach. Like, there was, we have a bunch of stories like that tell you you're getting a really good quarterback. It was just a matter of, at Ohio State, I think even if he hadn't played that 5th game as a freshman, that might have changed a lot of this dynamic, because this really comes down to, he has 1 year left, and he has to be somewhere where he knows he gets to play every day in that 1 year left.
Nathan, can't tell you how much I appreciate the insight here, not only here on the show today, but for our Syracuse Sports Insiders. I've been texting you the past couple of weeks. This is interesting. This went from, I think it's happening, to the trail went cold. We all thought he was going to Nebraska, to he is now the starting quarterback for the Syracuse football Orange. How the college football world turns. So I'm sure we'll be in touch a little bit more. As I brought up at the beginning, guys, Nathan has a terrific podcast. They talk about Ohio State football every day. It's called Buckeye Talk. You can check that out. Their fans, Ohio State fans, much like our Syracuse Sports Insiders, get terrific text updates from Nathan and his crew at cleveland.com, and they do an amazing job covering all things Ohio State, so make sure you check that out. And Nathan, thank you for coming on with us today here on Syracuse Sports. We really appreciate it, my friend.
Yeah, of course, anytime.
My thanks again to Nathan for coming on with us from cleveland.com, who has covered Kyle McCord closely over the past couple of years. Terrific insight from him on the person, the player, and everything in between. A big thanks to our Syracuse Sports Insiders. Become a Syracuse Sports Insider today, guys. I promise you'll enjoy it. And if you don't, you can cancel at any time. Just text the word orange to 315 847-3895. There's also ways you can find out how to sign up on syracuse.com. You get my opinions first. When we have breaking news to share with you, like the Kyle McCord story on Saturday night, you got it first as a Syracuse Sports Insider. Your questions, your opinions, text me directly. I text you back. It's been great so far. Let's keep it rolling into the new year. Can you believe it? We're almost to 2024. Amazing to think about here with the holiday season kicking into full gear. So we hope you consider adding us as a Syracuse Sports Insider, and we would love to hear your thoughts, your opinions, your questions, and so much more. So this week is, like I said, going to be flexible, guys. I do have a plan to talk to Emily Leiker about bowl game stuff. Certainly, we've got signing day coming up on Wednesday. Fran Brown, is going to add more players. So some more big ones to come, I'm sure. We'll react to that accordingly. We're going to have a post-game pod Thursday night after the Boca Bowl, Syracuse and South Florida. Programming note, we will not be doing a basketball post-game show this week because the Niagara basketball game at the Dome, same night as the Boca Bowl. So we're going to focus on the bowl game for a post-game show that night, guys. I'm on football duty on Thursday. But we'll be watching the basketball game, so feel free to text away as a Syracuse Sports Insider as always, and emergency pods as necessary because they've kept us on our toes for sure since Fran Brown took over, I should say, and more to come throughout the week. But thanks for listening and watching today. Thanks for being a Syracuse Sports Insider. Thanks to Krause Health, the exclusive healthcare partner for Syracuse Athletics. And we will talk to you next time, guys. Thanks for hanging here on Syracuse Sports.